Let us pray. We, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all our considerations. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Leader of the opposition, the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice under Standing Order 40 to request after question period and before the calling of orders of the day unanimous consent to debate the following motion. Be it resolved that the adjournment hour of the Assembly be extended today to 8 p.m. to permit wide-ranging debate on the report of the Code Inquiry on the collapse of FIC, AIC, and the principal group of companies under consideration of the Provincial Treasurer's departmental estimates designated by the official opposition for this afternoon's agenda.
Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Rule 30, I beg leave to introduce a notice with respect to debate under Standing Order 30. Notice pursuant to your request has been delivered to you, and it is to suspend the daily routine after question period and to allow the House to move immediately into a debate on the principal group matter.
Okay. Further notices?
Introduction of bills.
Okay, the member for Redwater, Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce bill number PR5, the Misericordia Hospitals Amendment Act, and that's a bill to change from two bodies to one corporation.
Okay. The honourable member for Redwater, Andrew, has moved first reading to bill number PR5, Misericordia Hospital Amendment Act 1989. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR5, Misericordia Hospital Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Zurowski, is now read at first time.
Member for Edmonton Gold-Bar.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill PR number 4, the Edmonton Community Foundation Amendment Act 1989. This bill, Mr. Speaker, carries out extensive amendments to the Edmonton Community Foundation Act with a view to enabling the foundation to become active again.
The honourable member for Edmonton Gold-Bar has moved first reading to bill PR4, Edmonton Community Foundation Amendment Act 1989. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR4, Edmonton Community Foundation Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the honourable member, Mrs. Hughes, is now read at first time.
Edmonton Meadowlark. Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR10, being the Margaret Kenford Adoption Act. This bill provides for the adoption of an adult.
The honourable member for Edmonton Meadowlark has moved first reading of Bill PR 10, Margaret Kenford Adoption Act. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 10, Margaret Kenford Adoption Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Mitchell, is now read a first time.
Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to introduce Bill PR 13, the Sherry Lynn Adam Adoption Act. This bill provides for the adoption of an adult.
The honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar has moved first reading of Bill PR 13, Sherry Lynn Adam Adoption Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 13, Sherry Lynn Adam Adoption Act, introduced by the honourable member Mrs. Hughes, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table with the Assembly the annual report of the Surface Reclamation Fund.
Thank you.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Redwater Andrew, followed by Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and to the rest of the Assembly 3 gentlemen from the Redwater Andrew constituency who are also involved in local government out there, and they're visiting the legislature today in regards to some municipal matters. They are Mr. Ed Stelmach, the Reeve of the County of Lamont, Mr. Dennis Estefachik, Mayor of Andrew, and Mr. Marshall Stewart, Councillor from Andrew. They're seated in the members' gallery. I ask that they rise and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to introduce several guests from Japan who are visiting health care facilities in our province and city. I would ask the following visitors to rise when I read their names. Mr. Nakanishi, Mr. Kateumi, Mr. Kobayashi, Mr. Kiriyama, Mr. Amano, Mr. Tsujita. All are accompanied by a department person from my own department, Ms. Moira King, and I'd ask them to receive the warm welcome of our Assembly.
My pleasure today to introduce a number of special visitors here from Trinidad. There are some 25 students in all, including, in addition to 8 adults with the group and 7 adults from Edmonton. They are joined by Dr. Alan McKenzie and Mr. Heidel, their 2 leaders, and they're also joined by a very good friend of ours, all of ours, Dr. Steve Ramsanker, who is the principal of Alec Taylor School. I know that this is a return visit when Dr. Ramsanker visited Trinidad during the spring break with a number of students from Alec Taylor School. So I'd ask them all to rise and receive the very warm wishes of the Assembly.
Member for Highwood.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly an educational consultant from the Foothills School Division, Ms. Maureen Close, and I would ask her to stand and receive the welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the report produced by Mr. Code yesterday is frankly a damning indictment of the last 10 years of this Conservative government's unholy alliance with its corporate friends. Mr. Speaker, the government let Mr. Comrie bend, break the laws, break the regulations, and then helped him cover it up, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, he makes it clear that this government is to blame. He says that the Superintendent of Insurance, quote, did not fulfill his duty to administer and enforce Investments Contract Act and this failure involved dishonesty on his part. He also says that the chief regulator's failure to protect the public was a result of the compliance with the policy of his boss, the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, who, Mr. Speaker, he describes her conduct, among other things, as being neglectful, misguided, and reckless. Mr. Speaker, given that on November the 23rd, 1987, the Premier told this Assembly that the government would repay investors, and I quote, if there is negligence, any proof that the government has in some way damaged investors. Now, Mr. Speaker, will he now tell us what it will cost Alberta taxpayers to keep his promise to make good on his government's negligence?
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised, actually, that the Leader of the Opposition would phrase his question that way when the government has already stated that, yes, this is a very important report, and it's on a very important matter. It has just been released, and that the government will take a period of time to give it full assessment and then make a statement covering the entire report.
Mr. Speaker, this has been going on for 2 years. We were told by this government that when the code report came back, they'd let us know what's going on.
Hear, hear.
But, Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General. The report also finds multiple instances of fraudulent and dishonest conduct on the part of Mr. Comrie. My question is to the Attorney General. Will he now indicate what steps his department will take to recover assets still in possession of this man, to ensure that they help reduce the burden on Alberta taxpayers by helping to pay back the investors? Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Leader of the Opposition would agree with me that since there is a Mr. Comrie and a Mr. Cormie who are businessmen in Alberta, that he'd want it clear that it's Cormie.
Speaker, I take that and I want to make that clear to the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is in error when he says that the Inspector, Mr. Code, found that there was fraud or dishonesty. He gave evidence that tended to show that, which it was not even within the parameters of that. But aside from that error, I can assure the Assembly that the Attorney General Department, through the RCMP, are actively after the assets and any other things that may result in laying some actions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is encouraging, but to follow up with the Attorney General then, what steps specifically then is the Attorney General taking to ensure a quick response to the strongly worded allegations that Mr. Code has made? In other words, does he intend to follow up and lay criminal charges?
Mr. Speaker, whenever there's instances of alleged wrongdoing, the RCMP, as the police force for our province, are sent in. They've been monitoring and investigating on this particular action since the inception, and that I'm sure once they've been able to distill through all of the information and follow it through its many, many tentacles, that there will be action taken.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, also to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, in 1987, the Premier and his ministers repeatedly told this Assembly that only after the report of the Code Inquiry would they respond to charges that the ministers of the Crown and their officials were somehow responsible for the collapse of principal companies. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Premier is saying it'll be some time down the future. Time is of the essence for many of these investors. But, Mr. Speaker, this report is a clear indictment. It shouldn't take long to figure that out, of the roles of certain ministers and the government as a whole under this Premier and his predecessor. While certain ministers, Mr. Speaker, have to take responsibility, the responsibility rests right at the top with this Premier, Mr. Speaker. But let me ask some questions about the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, now Career Development. Mr. Speaker, given that the Code report calls the minister's conduct, and I quote, neglectful, misguided, and even reckless, and that he indicates that she breached, he says that she breached her public duty, will the Premier now tell the House whether the minister has done the right thing, the honourable thing, and tendered her resignation, and if not, when will he seek it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm quite surprised at the lead-in by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition regarding the Code report, because it has taken some 2 years for Mr. Code to go through this matter, some $25 million. He has put in a report of in excess of 600 pages. Having done that, and accepting, as I have with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the importance of the issue, surely the responsible, intelligent thing to do is to take some time and go through the report. It's going to be, Mr. Speaker, a matter of approximately a week, as the Provincial Treasurer said earlier, for the government to deal with the matter in detail and make a statement. Now, I think that's responsible. I think, Mr. Speaker, it's far more responsible that you take the time to read and assess it than rush to the media, as the Honourable Leader of the two opposition parties did, without even reading the report. Now, that's irresponsible.
Mr. Speaker.
Shame on your
Mr.
cheap
Speaker.
version of politics.
We read that report, and it doesn't take a genius. Even the Premier could figure out when they say neglectful, misguided, and negligent what that means. My question is to the Premier. My question is, saying that was said and there was a breach of duty by this minister, is he going to demand the resignation and do the right thing or not?
I repeat, Mr. Speaker, the government will take the report, assess it, and make a statement.
Mr. Speaker, this has been going on for over 2 years. And my question flowing from this, how much harm does a minister of this government have to impose on innocent Albertans before this Premier demands a resignation?
Again, Mr. Speaker, my answer stands that the government has received a very important report. It's a long report, complex, one that has taken a long time to be compiled. We've just received it. I might also point out to the members, Mr. Speaker, that the report was in the hands of the Justice, and the Justice did not make copies available even to all members of the legislature. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I think that it's reasonable to say that this body, this House, should have copies of that report, and that's being done as quickly as possible. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, I feel it's incumbent on members to read this report. I have, and the government will respond in a reasoned manner after full assessment.
Okay. The member for Edmonton-Glengarry. Edmonton-Glengarry, Leader of the Liberals.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it takes a week to read a report that is clearly and very nicely written. You don't have to be a lawyer to understand it. I've read the report. This report... Premier, even you could understand it, Mr. Premier. Mr. Premier, the report singles out two ministers of the Crown. They're singled out for being tardy, for being negligent, and one for being reckless. The report says that if ministers had taken proper action, millions of dollars could have been saved by that action. I believe that the stability, the financial stability of this province has been affected by this inaction. Parliamentary custom calls for a disciplined action to be taken by a leader. Mr. Premier, first of all, I'd like to ask whether you have read the report, sir.
First question. Mr. Speaker, yes. And I'll guarantee you the honourable member hadn't before he was running to the media yesterday.
Right. Well, I'm sure he'll agree that it is clear. And on that basis, I would like to ask the Premier whether he's prepared to take the necessary disciplinary action against two ministers that are so clearly and totally singled out for their incompetence that something should be done now. Are you prepared to do it, sir?
One of the things the honourable member has learned from his predecessor who sits behind him is when you have a fairly weak position, yell. And the lesson's been passed on well. As I said, Mr. Speaker, what we are going to do is take a very important, complex and detailed report, assess it. The people of Alberta would want us to do that, assess it in a reasoned, detailed manner, and then respond to it. That's exactly what we intend to do.
We're seeing the same tardiness, ironically, as we saw from the government before, Mr. Premier. My question is this: can you give some assurance to investors outside of the province of Alberta that they too will be looked after, that they will get the sympathy, the same sympathy that I think Albertans are entitled to get that invested in these principal group companies?
Contrary to your recommendation.
I must say, Mr. Speaker, I've just answered the question that the government is going to assess the report and then make a statement and the actions that it will follow. When the honourable member talks about tardiness, the government moved faster than Mr. Code did.
Member for Bow Valley, followed by Edmonton Strathcona. Bow Valley.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Honourable Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. Yesterday there was a delegation from the Soviet Union in my constituency visiting the Canadian Armed Force Base in Suffield. Now I wonder if the ministers had a chance to contact the officials of the Suffield Army Base and discuss the reason for the Soviet delegation.
Order. Let's not have this going on. There's enough of it. The member has asked a question. It is indeed up to the minister to respond, not the leaders of the opposition. Thank you. Or members of the opposition. Members.
Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, it was a very important delegation in Alberta yesterday of 10 members from the Soviet Union, including scientists, military personnel, and diplomats who were visiting the Suffield Experimental Station for the purpose of reviewing with the Defense Research Establishment the issue of toxic nerve gases, their use and storage and testing. They were there at the invitation of the then Minister of National Defense, the Honourable Perrin Beatty, and the invitation was continued by the current Minister of National Defense, Mr. Bill McKnight, and I had the opportunity last evening in Medicine Hat to have brief discussions with representatives from both the USSR and the Canadian forces and the Defense Research Establishment staff, who indicated the visit had gone very well and that this very major step towards hopefully further action in Geneva in the discussions relative to elimination of toxic weapons and nerve gas testing in the world this step can be regarded as fairly significant in terms of moving towards elimination of those dreadful weapons.
Mr. Speaker, it was indicated that disposal of present storage of natural gas on hand was all that is happening in the Suffield Army Base at the present time. I'm wondering if the minister found out yesterday from the Canadian Armed Force Base and from the Soviets whether there is still experimental work going on and testing of poisonous biochemicals in Suffield.
Mr. Speaker, well, the honourable member for Vegreville and the NDP think this is a funny issue. I thought they thought it was a serious matter, Mr. Speaker, but in any event, it was made clear that no further testing is taking place. A report commissioned by the Department of National Defense by William Barton was made public some time ago. It recommended a process for disposal of gas is stored there, and that process was being reviewed. But I was assured last evening that no additional testing is underway now or contemplated in the future at the base.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, would be to the Minister of Hospitals and Medicare. Under Section 3 of the Public Health Act, the Minister has the authority to call for an investigation into the testing and storage and disposal of chemical weapons. Does the Minister have any intention of carrying on this type of an investigation?
I'll take the question as the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker. Certainly the safety and the handling and the disposal of materials in this instance would be the responsibility of the Department of National Defense. And I have no reason to believe they aren't being handled in a safe way. But nonetheless, in the interests of not only the people in the surrounding area, but also the interests that we all attach to the issue, I have asked the officials in my department from the Environmental Health section to discuss the matter with the Department of National Defense officials to ensure that the health and safety in the surrounding area is well protected. With respect to taking any action under Section 3 of the Public Health Act, I'm not prepared to respond in the House today to that matter, but nonetheless it will be something that I will review.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Calgary Buffalo, then Lesser Slave Lake.
Mr. Speaker, never in the 19 years of the existence of this Conservative government, Mr. Speaker, has anything more clearly been shown than has been shown in Mr. Coade's report of the extent to which a Conservative government, and this government in particular, is willing to stand by its friends in rich and powerful places while they skim money and extract money from the common people by means, in circumstances, that's to say, instinct, with fraud and dishonesty. And yet, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General tells us that he still hasn't decided, after 2 years of police investigation, against whom charges should be laid. What in heaven's name, Mr. Speaker, have the police been doing in the meantime?
Mr. Speaker, again fraught with error. This government did not do this. This government implemented this initiative. Again, don't want to hear the answer. I'm also somewhat dismayed that the honourable member from Strathcona, who at one time was employed in the Attorney General's Department, does not understand that once an investigation is put underway in a criminal matter by a police force, you do not interfere. You allow them with full open mandate to do a full open investigation and then lay the charges against all of those who may be guilty. This rush to have something happen tomorrow is a desire for all of us, but also there is a legal procedure that we have as a tradition, and that's let the police force do their work.
Another dial mortgage. Wait till it does.
In my day, Mr. Speaker, we certainly got answers on important matters within 2 years.
That's right.
Within that length of time, Mr. Speaker, what steps have the police taken to secure the evidence so that when and if charges are laid, there'll be a reasonable chance of proceeding successfully?
Mr. Speaker, again, a person with legal training would not expect to divulge the details of an investigation, the modus operandi of an investigation. Again, leave the police to their work. The RCMP have one of the highest traditions. They also want to see justice done.
Well, again, secrecy and cover-up, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
What Code said about you.
That's right. You're full of cover-up.
Given that the Comey family is widely spread, what can the Attorney General tell us
about the efforts of the police to widen the investigation beyond Alberta and Canada and to seek the greatest relief that is possible elsewhere.
Mr. Speaker, I think part of the answer is couched in the two previous ones, but I can assure the honourable member that the police do know the whereabouts, maybe not from minute to minute, but generally know whereabouts of all of the players in this. They know the details that have been accumulated over the last 2 years. We don't, in our justice system, have an Attorney General or a member of this government who runs or controls the RCMP. When they are encroached with a duty, they carry it out, and in due time, I'm sure the honourable member will be happy, as well as everybody in this assembly, that charges will be laid.
Calgary Buffalo, followed by Lesser Slave Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that this assembly have the opportunity to fully question ministers, former ministers, and civil servants about their role in the principal affair. Unfortunately, the question period format is inadequate since it doesn't even allow the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, the member from Three Hills, to be questioned about her former portfolio. So I would suggest that we need to refer this matter to a committee, possibly the Standing Committee on Public Affairs, and to give that committee the right to call witnesses. I'm wondering to the Premier, I'm wondering whether the Premier would agree that it is appropriate for members of this House to have the opportunity to question the former minister, including the member from Three Hills and others, on these matters.
Mr. Speaker, I guess the honourable member can put any motion on the order paper he'd like, but what is remarkable is to hear him ask whether ministers and members of the government can be questioned in an open forum when, in fact, the government placed in the hands of the court the most powerful type of inquiry possible, and in fact, we have just had the ministers and the various...
Edmonton Kingsway, thank you. That's enough time for comment. If you want to get into question period, the chair will recognize you later in the day. Thank you very much. Premier? Oh. Absolutely, I welcome it at the end of question period. Honourable Premier?
What section? The most exhaustive inquiry, questioning, if possible, where the government provided the best possible lawyers to all of those who were participating, Mr. Speaker, have some 200 manuscripts of detailed questions and answers, and now a report. And the honourable member says, let's have a question and answer period of these people, I think is absolutely going across old ground. This is why, Mr. Speaker, of such a detailed report, such an exhaustive study by Mr. Code, that the government is saying we should now, all members, take the time to get a copy of the report and read it. And, Mr. Speaker, and the government will, in fact, assess the report and make a statement, a full statement, with regards to its actions because of it.
Mr. Speaker, the Code report dealt with legal accountability, and this House is interested in public and political accountability, and I'm wondering whether the Premier then is saying that no, he is not going to cooperate with any efforts to enable members of this House to get answers directly from the member from Three Hills with respect to her former portfolio.
Mr. Speaker, it's unbelievable the honourable member would say the government was not going to cooperate to get answers when we have put in place this powerful judicial investigation. We've ordered the Ombudsman to carry out an investigation as well, and that both have been going on in such detail, which leading to one report and a further one to come. I think that's an unbelievable statement for the honourable member to make.
That is true.
Well, let's get precise, because process is fundamentally important in this issue. And is the Premier prepared to support an initiative to refer this matter to a standing committee in order to allow witnesses, including the former member from Three Hills, to be called and answer questions?
I can only refer the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, to the answers I just gave him. He may read his questions over and over, but he should also listen to the answers.
Lesser Slave Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to the Minister of Transportation. During the March election, the government promised that all secondary roads would be paved within a 10-year span. A principal concern of my constituents and myself are the roads in my constituency. They are in a sad state, needing a great deal of upgrading. My constituents are extremely interested in knowing what construction will occur on highways number 88, number 754, 750, and 813.
And 601 while you're at it.
Mr. Speaker, relative to the secondary highway program that was announced during the last election, that gives me an opportunity to maybe identify the number of gravel roads that are in the province and what are secondary highways and what are not. There's 140,000 kilometers of secondary or gravel roads in the province, 14,600 of which are secondary highways. And in relation to the ones that you asked about, 813 is the one between Calling Lake and Wabasca, and there is grading going on now, hopefully to be completed by this fall, God willing and weather permitting. That's whether they finish it or not with the kind of weather we've had. And that's not a pun, Mr. Speaker. On 750, there's a carryover contract from last year, and hopefully we'll be announcing one in the fall to proceed from that particular point on. Highway 88 has a major construction program on it, north to Red Earth from the junction of 750 and 88, and that's a primary highway, Mr. Speaker.
Just a second question. When will the priorities for construction be set for next year, and how are these done?
Mr. Speaker, to the honourable member from Lesser Slave Lake, what happens is that the department officials sit down with, in this case, the Improvement District Council, and get from them their priorities, usually listed on the basis of 1, 2, 3, and 4, with the attempt that we'll try and do number 1, and if possible, if there are dollars available, do 2. The last couple of years has not been the case in that sense, but what we would do also is have an indication from the MLAs of the area what their priorities are after working it out with the various councils.
Thank you.
Okay, Calgary Mountain View, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. July of 1986, a month after the Treasurer's Department assumed responsibility for regulating the Cormie companies, the Treasurer was advised by British Columbia regulators that the sale of investment certificates in that province would be terminated and that independent consultants should be appointed to review FIC and AIC finances. As well, Inspector Code found the Treasurer was aware of the Public Auditor's 1985 report outlining major concerns with the Cormie Company's affairs. And yet, Mr. Speaker, it was several months later, not until November of '86, after the companies were already reported insolvent, that the Treasurer finally got around to appointing some independent consultants. To the Provincial Treasurer, Mr. Speaker, does he agree with the Inspector's view that without his puzzling lack of action, there would have been less money lost to investors and more assets left to divide among them after the failures?
Mr. Speaker, I think we've already made it very clear that until we have an opportunity to bring together a full review of the code report, that we will simply take these notices of questions as motion, these questions as notice, and at some time, probably in the next week, as the Premier pointed out, we'll provide a comprehensive and full response where necessary, and I would imagine including some comments on what Mr. Code may have said about the government or certain members of the government. But at this point, Mr. Speaker, I think we've made it very clear on Monday that that'll be our position.
Well, come on, Dick.
Mr. Speaker, this is all part of the pattern of this government to avoid this particular problem. It's continued. Will the Treasurer now affirm the conclusion of the Inspector that he, the Treasurer, knew or ought to have known that statements in the FIC and AIC certificates were untrue, and thus, by allowing the continued sale of the certificates to the unsuspecting public long after they should have been allowed on the market, that he was helping in the cover-up of this particular problems at with FIC and AIC?
That's the size of it.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it strikes me, Mr. Speaker, that the member wants to go right through the entire process of investigation of what Mr. Code spent from October of 1987 until yesterday, trying to unfold, try to unravel. As I've said before in this House, Mr. Speaker, this government has made every possible piece of information available. We have put in place a process which cost the taxpayers of this province some $25 million approximately. All members of Cabinet who were involved in any way have been either given a declaration of their position, attended in person, or made available to them all the evidence possible. And so, Mr. Speaker, I think that process, together with the Ombudsman process, has been the fullest possible discussion and review of this particular big problem, a problem which this government is going to deal with and give recommendations in the next week. Mr. Speaker, let me make it very clear that if the member continues in this case, I think what he's suggesting is that a servant of the court, Mr. Code in this case, did not do his job well. Now, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it seems to me that's what, in fact, he's implying. What we have done here, Mr. Speaker, is put in place an unheard-of process to ensure that every possible bit of information provided. Mr. Code's report is here now, and we're going to weigh it.
Mr. Speaker, the conclusion of this report was that there was one consistent response from this government: delay, 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 and that's still what we're getting here this afternoon. Will the Treasurer tell this Assembly why it was it took him 14 months after this present Premier took over the job of government, why it took him 14 months to tell the Premier that something had to be done about FICAIC? That's the Premier's sworn statement.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've already given that information to Mr. Code, and we stand by the testimony we gave there and the reasons, Mr. Speaker. You know, you just can't take one side of the issue as the member has put forward here. There are other reasons, and I'm not going to get into them right now, but I have had a chance to make the explanation on behalf of the government. As I say, we stand by what we gave to Mr. Code.
Thank you. Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Clover Bar, and then Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to be sure, as just been pointed out, the Code report was in fact very critical of the failure of the Provincial Treasurer to act to protect investors earlier than he did. Investors, in fact, continued to put money into First and Associated from June of '86 to July of '87, long after the minister had audits and other reports showing that the companies were insolvent. In fact, testimony at the Code indicates they should have been closed in 1984. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Treasurer is a very simple one. I'm not just puzzled. I want to know why. I want the Treasurer to explain to the House why he didn't take action when he got the audit report in May of '86. Why didn't he take action right then?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, everyone, including Mr. Code, and now the member, has the advantage of hindsight, Mr. Speaker. But as I said before, we will make our position clear here in the next week. We have no hesitancy of putting together a package which I think will explain our position, which will respond to what Mr. Code has said. And until then, Mr. Speaker, our position is very clear. You can raise all those kinds of questions, you can make all those kinds of statements, but I think you're preempting what, in fact, Mr. Code has said. Moreover, you're preempting what, in fact, the court has ordered.
Mr. Speaker, it's time to stop dissembling. It's time to stop dissembling, Mr. Minister. Does the Minister then acknowledge that all of those ensuing months, that good-living, God-fearing Albertans were putting their hard-earned savings into insolvent companies as a result of his licensing? Do you acknowledge that, Mr. Minister?
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's no question that the company did not end until June 30th, 1987. So whatever dollar was taken before that, going back some 50-some years, I suppose, was possibly included in whatever losses may have been experienced by the contract holders. Mr. Speaker, the members are calling for the government to give a response, to do something, to come to some conclusion. We've given you the assurance we'll do that within the next few days.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, it's obvious the Treasurer has read the report and it's clear enough there. Does the Treasurer then acknowledge that it was absolutely unethical for his government to have knowingly allowed investors to continue to put money into bankrupt companies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, the member is drawing some very curious kinds of conclusions that we can't agree with. And, Mr. Speaker, you'd have to go back a very long ways to judge what it is the member is saying. Frankly, I think the question is really out of order.
The Chair concurs.
as a matter of fact. Clover Bar, followed by Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is related to the safety concerns at the 23rd Avenue and Highway 14 intersection, and it's addressed to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities. In response to my question yesterday in this House, the Minister indicated, and I refer to Hansard, page 818, that his department will undertake a full review, and further he indicated that he may be able to implement some short-term and long-term solutions. Will the Minister indicate when... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister indicate when the full review by his department may be completed?
I can't give you an exact date, Mr. Speaker, in the sense that the complexity of the fact that there were 2 fatalities within a short period of time on that intersection. We do have the investigation underway, and the report will be to me as quickly as that they have it completed. That's all I can do right at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister indicate what short-term solutions that he referenced in his answer he may be able to implement and when?
As I said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, one of the short-term solutions may well come from a recommendation out of the investigation. One has already been presented to me, and that's the extending of the turning lane and then putting an island in there so that those who stop on 23rd would be able to move a little further out with the protection of the island and then only have the 2 lanes to cross. That's one that has been provided to me already as a recommendation that might be completed in the short term.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Then on to the long term. Will the Minister indicate the time frame for the long-term solutions required in his response?
Mr. Speaker, I can't give any more detail on that other than to say that there is some land acquisition taking place right now relative to one future overpass on that section of highway, and I believe it's 45th Avenue.
Vegreville, followed by Westlock, Sturgeon, then Calgary, Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative government making secret deals to prop up and protect their buddy Don Cormy caused the principal fiasco and left thousands of innocent Albertans and taxpayers holding the bag. As well, they've made secret deals to prop up and bail out their buddy Peter Pocklington, and Alberta taxpayers could be left holding a $67 million bag. Now, Mr. Speaker, evidence tends to show that soon after the government made a $12 million loan to Mr. Peter Pocklington at 9.6%, Gainers Incorporated issued $12 million worth of preferred shares to pay dividends at 9.6%. Perhaps another of the Treasurer's coincidences, but I'd like to ask the Provincial Treasurer very clearly, does the provincial government, any of its agencies or numbered companies, have any interest in these $12 million of preferred Class C shares, or are they held by Gainers Properties Incorporated?
Well, Speaker, there seems to be several questions there. I can say that the province does not own any pref shares of any company operating by Gainers Incorporated, or the Pocklington Empire.
I'm talking very specifically about $12 million of shares approved soon after these loans were approved, Mr. Speaker, and I think the Provincial Treasurer ought to know. I wonder what evidence the Provincial Treasurer can use to show Albertans that this $12 million loan, $6 million advanced so far, has not been used to cover the operating losses of Gainers Incorporated.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a mix and a match of various concepts flowing from the Minister. He tends to put his mouth in gear before he starts thinking. Let me make it very clear, Mr. Speaker, that we have already indicated that the government, the Department of Economic Development, put in place a $12 million provision. That $12 million provision was subject to certain conditions, and those conditions were satisfied along the line. We advanced $12 million in that line. You've already had the Minister explain that to you. And that $12 million was for 2 purposes: for general purposes of the corporation, to allow it to restructure itself, to deal with the kinds of problems it was facing, for general purposes, as we've indicated. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, there'll be not any more money allocated under that $12 million line of credit, because, of course, the company has until September the 30th, 1989 to start construction of a new plant. Now, if that plant does not start, no more money will be advanced on this loan vehicle, Mr. Speaker, a loan vehicle. A loan vehicle against which the government has security, against which payments on interest start on October the 1st, 1989, and which in fact is at normal commercial terms. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's the outline of the deal. I've answered both questions as fairly and objectively as we can, and for the member to read into that or try to cause people to read something into it is in fact misleading.
You've not answered the question, and Bill Code's going to have another job to do if you don't straighten this mess out.
That's right.
The question remains, what evidence does the provincial treasurer have to prove that the $6 million advanced to Peter Pocklington is not being used to cover the operating losses of Gainers Incorporated?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, presumably he's flagging some major mystery here. We said that the $6 million could in fact be used for general purposes. But in doing that, Mr. Speaker, the same as any other person, you advance the money, you take the credit, you take the covenants back, full security, Mr. Speaker, put in place the repayment schedules, establish the interest rate, and that's how the business world works, Mr. Speaker. Now, the member can rail over there all he wants, but I think for him, the largest thing he's ever done in his life is probably make it to this House, Mr. Speaker, and I know the people of Vegreville respect him, but unfortunately he doesn't understand much about the business world.
Westlock Sturgeon. Westlock Sturgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, too, is to the provincial treasurer. We've been hearing in the legislature and know, of course, the terrific cost to the taxpayers of the investigation, of the code investigation, and so much so, in fact, that it seems to me that maybe many would think that the government would have been wiser just to pay off and fess up at the beginning instead of ratting out and delaying and going duck and weaving. What I'm after, Mr. Speaker, is could the provincial treasurer give an estimate to the House, just a portion of the fees that were paid to the code report, how much of that went for legal fees to the Cormie, for the legal counsel retained by the Cormie family?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I'd be at some point willing to provide that kind of information, but as you can expect, some of the details of accounting for not just the inquiry, this full inquiry which the government has fully financed, are not just before me, but I'm sure at some point I'll be glad to make that available.
Oh, no? I won't say.
Mr. Speaker, it's hard to say whether the treasurer doesn't know or won't say. I don't know why he'd want to hide the legal cost of protecting the Cormies. Mr. Speaker, the second question then is, as we know, there is an investigation on by the provincial ombudsman. But does the treasurer have an estimate as to what that will cost the taxpayers of Alberta, the investigation by the ombudsman of the principal collapse?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I can give some order of magnitude numbers for the code inquiry, and I think I referred to those already today. $22, $23 million or so. There was dollars in my budget, obviously, for the next year's apportionment. And if the member watches carefully, he would have seen during the debates in Executive Council that, in fact, there was more money given to the Ombudsman to allow him to step up, to do the additional work necessary to deal with our requested review by him of the government regulatory process. So the money is in the budget. It's not secret at all, but I'm sure the member, with his experience here in the House, can find that data as easily as I can.
It takes a lot of experience to grub around in the feathers that the honourable member throws up and hides. Maybe I could have better luck, Mr. Speaker, with the asking the Premier or something, this sideline that says, with respect to his often repeated statement, Mr. Speaker, that if depositors will be paid if the government is at fault. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know from the Premier whether that applies to depositors outside the province of Alberta as well as those in the province of Alberta.
You have to wonder, Mr. Speaker, about the degree of conversation between the leader and the previous leader, because they have both asked the same question. I assume they have some research help. I don't know if they have enough help to keep those two straight, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the people of Alberta should pay so many dollars it might be necessary to keep those two talking, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to allow the Minister of Agriculture to respond to a question as raised July the 17th, a question raised by the member for Westlock Sturgeon. Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Minister of Agriculture.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday of this week, the member for Westlock Sturgeon was inquiring as to whether there was any protection or insurance plan that would ensure producers got paid when livestock was delivered. And I would like to share with the House, for his and other members' information, that all packing plants in Alberta are licensed as livestock dealers. All licensed dealers are required to provide security in the form of a bond or irrevocable letter of credit before they can be licensed. In addition, there is a Livestock Patrons Assurance Fund, which is available in case of a livestock dealer bankruptcy. The total protection from these two sources gives producers a payout on qualifying claims of 80% of the shortfall to a maximum of $100,000 per claimant. Further discussions are presently taking place regarding a vendor checkoff so that we can even strengthen that protection.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, may I then ask the Minister, in view of the fact that the coverage is up to a maximum of 80%, a maximum of $100,000, and the fact that the report on gainers' possibilities of having economic troubles could hurt or accelerate the problem by many livestock dealers not wanting to deliver because even the loss of 20% and anything over 100,000 would scare them off. Would the Minister consider, along with the Premier, putting in a short-term guarantee that if gainers goes under, unlike the principle required, no innocent people will suffer?
Mr. Speaker, I think the member's question is hypothetical to a large extent, and it may be a lot of the adverse publicity being created on the opposite side of the House that may be making some producers nervous. But I would be prepared to say, Mr. Speaker, that we on this side of the House will make every effort, regardless of who a livestock producer ships to ensure that they get full payment.
Point of order raised in question period. Edmonton Kingsway.